This is one of the two bellows assemblies that moves the UKE rail in a Kimball Electromatic player on and off. And the way that it operates is that it's mounted to the aluminum platform, and then when you turn the switch on, it sucks the air out of this little bellow. This is a bellow right here. It sucks the air out of that bellow, and the bellow collapses, and as it collapses it pulls the rail down. It doesn't have to move very far. It only has to move about 3/4 of an inch. And you can see it can move that 3/4 of an inch without much problem. Looks like a relatively simple assembly. However, it's not quite as simple as it looks. Here are all the parts. That are in the assembly. Let's see if I get those all into frame here. This piece goes on the bottom, and it fits into here. As you can see, it's even when they were new, I imagine that they might have even been a little more difficult to get on when they were new, but with a little bit of patience you can get the booty around the edge. Probably should have practiced this before I started recording. Okay, and then that's in place. I didn't find any sealant on these as I took it apart. I didn't find any sealant on the ridge here, so I can assume that it's just the rubber and plastic connection here that creates the seal. And that's for the bottom half of the bellow. And then on the top half of the bellow is this piece right here, which actually goes up inside. And with a little bit of manipulating, you can get that up in there. There we go. And this piece too just pops in there, and the rubber is what holds it in place. Then this spring goes inside here, and I found that I could just wind this on in here and then just push it down on in. Kind of stretch the bellow a little bit and kind of push that spring down in there. And what that does is it helps support the, gives it a little bit of springiness so that it pops back up. This piece, actually I'm going to put a little sealant on this. There's a little low quality glue or some sort of a sealant that was on there that goes right on like this. And this actually acts as the limiter. This prevents the bellow from closing down too much. And that goes back on here. this goes back on here. No, it's already fallen off. I should probably go ahead and glue that back on before I try to assemble this. But once that's back together, or before that's back together, what you have to do in order to put this in, because if you try to put this back into its position, there are 4 holes here. If you try to push this back into position, what ends up happening is that this piece falls out. So what you have to do is before you put the spring in, go. Before you put the spring, you have to put your finger up inside here and then push that being hard to get along with. If I use my other finger here, there we go, so I can hold that like that and then push that on. It just fits right on there. And then you could go ahead and put the spring in. And then I'm going to go ahead and glue that back on and then put that back together. I've just glued this in place with a little bit of thinner seal. You can see the white edge around there. Nothing fancy. And then we'll let that dry. Now I've decided to make a little change here in this. Instead of putting this piece back in without a sealant, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of Fineseal here and I'm just going to put it around the edge here. I know that the manufacturer didn't do this, but I don't see any problem with just adding a little bit of a sealant around the edge so that it's more airtight, or 100% airtight. We can get this up here. There we go. Bing, bang, boom. I'm going to turn that around in there. And actually, I don't see any problem with taking a little more seal and putting it right around the edge here. And then we'll just let that dry. Certainly not going to hurt anything, and it might help make it 100% airtight is what I'm aiming for. While I'm here, let me show you what else is going on here. This is what's left of one of the force fit steel washers that was on this piece. And these, when this was put together at the factory, these were pressed on to this plastic piece right here, like that. If you can see that. You can see that washer right there. And when I removed this assembly from the aluminum housing that it's in, and I'll show you that in a second, I had to grind this off. I had to grind that off with a Dremel tool. There is no tool for actually removing those. And what I used was a grinding tool. This grinding tool, what I had to use to grind that down. You can see that when I did the first one, I wasn't quite careful enough as I was grinding it, and I actually broke this one right here. This one right here, if you look real closely, I don't know if you can see that or not, but if you look real closely you can see little indentations on that piece. I don't believe that this piece was designed to actually come out. I don't think that Kimball ever figured that it would come out. It actually goes right in here. This is where it came from. It was mounted in here. In fact, you might be able to see the grinding marks here from where I ground that one down. This is the other side of what it looks like. You can see where the mounting bracket went, and where this piece went, like this. And the reason that I don't think that Kimball actually ever figured that anybody would ever take these out is because there's another piece of aluminum that goes in here that's actually press fit into here, and you actually have to bend this piece right out. They got these little slots right here and right here. Got these slots that you can put a screwdriver in to bend this piece away so that you can remove the bottom plate, because underneath here are all of the tubes that connect to in the bottom half of the piano to all of the valves. And so just to get this piece out, just to get this assembly out so that you could go ahead and remove this, you'd have to remove all of the tubing, which as you can see here is not marked. Okay, so in fact, these ones right here have actually been cut. That's why they're all about the same length. So I mean, when I removed this piece from the piano, I didn't anticipate needing the tubing, so I just cut it all off. But to get this piece out of the piano, to get this piece out of the piano, you can get all these pieces out, all these other pieces you can get out, but to get this piece out of the piano, I tell you what, major job. Well, I don't think that Kimball ever figured that anybody would ever do that. And I don't know how difficult it would be, because of course you can see that this piece right here would sit flush with the metal. Right here it sits flush with the metal, so as far as putting this piece back on, I mean, you'd have to have some pretty good fingers to get underneath there to remove this piece from this piece. I don't know. I haven't tried yet to find out whether or not. I have another one right here that I haven't taken apart yet, and I kind of wondered whether or not, what would happen if I just tried to, because imagine that this piece is secured in the piano, I mean, and what would happen if you tried to just pull this piece off? I'm pulling pretty hard here and nothing's happening. Now I'm trying to figure out how. I mean, what I'm going to do is I'm going to squeeze this like this, squeeze it, squeeze it, squeeze it, and I'm squeezing and pulling at the same time. And you see, if I squeeze and pull hard enough, I can get this. I can get that to come off. Okay? And then you've got this piece that's secured. This one is secured much better than that other one was. I don't know when it comes to putting it back on, when you consider that this piece is mounted flush with the aluminum, that's the only amount of space that you have to work is right here. So I don't know how difficult it would be to get this booty back onto there. I imagine that you could sort of get it underneath the lip there. And maybe and then like a tire, you know, once you got it around the lip, you could just keep kind of turning it and turning it and turning it until it was all the way on. See, you can't reach your finger underneath there to hold it in place like with a tire. I mean, what I could do is try to pull that. I mean, I don't know how much pressure you could put on this piece when it's inside, you know, when it's in the piano. I don't know how much force you could apply without breaking these two little tabs right there. So if you could get that underneath there, maybe you could put a little oil or something like that on it. I can't imagine that that would hurt anything if you put a little bit of oil, so that it might slip on a little bit easier. What we got here? Take a little bit of good old WD-40. Just spray a little WD-40 on there. Let's see whether or not that makes it any easier to get that edge to go on. Kind of pushing and turning at the same time. If I could apply that pressure there, I don't know whether or not I'd be able to actually grab onto this edge here with that in the piano and just work this edge around a little bit at a time. At the very least, it looks like it would be a little frustrating. Requires some patience. And sure enough, got it on. So, of course, a little bit of lubricant on this probably wouldn't hurt. So, it's back together. Well, we'll see how this one goes when we get to that point. We're letting that dry and letting that dry. having put this one back together, I'm just kind of curious as to whether or not, without adding any sealant, whether or not this assembly right here is airtight. So I've connected up a vacuum hose to it, and I'm going to suck on it and then put my tongue over the end to see whether or not it holds a vacuum. And as you can see, it has no problem holding a vacuum at all. So I don't believe that the sealant is actually necessary. However, I'm going to go ahead and seal this bottom piece anyhow, because I think that having the liquid on there is actually going to make it a little bit easier to get the edge on. I'm just putting a little bit right around the edge here. Of course, have to remember that we have to put this in first. Get our finger up in there. Put that on. Put the spring in. Get that in there a little bit better. There we go. Spring in there. It'll find its own comfort zone in time. Probably once it's fully collapsed, the ridges of the spring will go wherever they're supposed to go. There we go. And you can see that sealant is already dried. This back on here. Catch an edge. Kind of reminds me of putting on a tire for a bicycle. And there we go. Of course, when you have this in, you have to remember which direction this elbow is pointing. You'd have to have made a reference on that when you took it out of the piano, so that you get the hose on the other side, because it's pointing, let's see, from where these sit in the piano, they point this direction, because the control for turning it on and off is over on the left end of the piano. So this one right here is actually pointing the wrong way, because the two connections for these, actually, there's a Y connector. There's a piece of hose that goes between this one and the Y connector, which is right on this side, and then there's one hose that goes to the on-off switch, which is in the spool box. So now these are back together. We'll go ahead and do a quick vacuum check on the one that we just put together. And you can see it's holding pressure to, or holding vacuum too. So that's it.